Hi, everybody, and welcome to Devotions on this Monday. I hope you had a nice, relaxing weekend, and that the week ahead is going to be blessed. As our minister, Peter Butterworth, always says, the Lord is with you, and He is, because He promised to be. Well, unless I am completely mistaken, I think all of us have things in our lives which we would like to see changed. Unless, of course, our lives are perfect, which is unlikely. And Paul had a similar experience, and I'd like to read to you. You recognize the passage from 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 7 to 10. To keep me from becoming conceited because of these surpassingly great revelations, because he's just been talking about these amazing experiences he's had, have been taken up into the third heaven and so on, there was given me a thorn in my flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong. What an extraordinary thing to say. Well, Paul asked 3 times, and then he realized that it wasn't worth asking anymore. I think some of us, like me, maybe have asked 100 times and more. And things don't seem to change. What was the thorn? I think one day when we get to heaven, there'll be a big board of frequently asked questions that will have the answers on them. One of them is, what was that thorn in the flesh? Well, in our lives, some things will change and some things will not. And some will take time to change. I think I've told you that when I was younger, as a teenager in my early 20s, I used to stammer terribly. And yet God called me into the ministry. How was I going to do this? Well, eventually, by His grace, I was able to overcome that stammer. And I've been able to carry on. But sometimes things don't go away. So how are we to cope with those things in our lives that simply are like thorns in the flesh? They don't vanish. Sometimes it can be our health. We've got something that just doesn't get better. It could be a disability that we have that we've got to learn how to live with. Could be something in the family that is not changing. It's a heartache to us. It could be so many things. And it might be another person that you find very difficult to get on with, and that person's not changing. Well, one way or another, we have those things. So how do we cope? What does Paul have to say about that? He says this. He says the first thing is that we have a promise from God. My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in your weakness. And weaknesses are the places in our lives where we find it very difficult to cope or to make things change. And so he's saying that we will know more of God's strength, God's power, through our weaknesses. That's the first thing he says, the promise of God. And then he says a strange thing. He says, therefore I will boast in my weaknesses. In the next verse he says, therefore I delight in my weaknesses. And the reason he says it is because it is in this way that Christ's power may rest on me. Because in my own strength, I can't cope with this thing. I can't manage it. But here we have the promise of God. My grace is sufficient. So as we accept and acknowledge our weakness, so we have the ability to receive more of God's strength. Without that weakness, we wouldn't know God in the way He's wanting us to know Him. And the last thing he says, he just makes a proclamation. He says, when I am weak, then I am strong. You see, God has a plan for each one of our lives. He has a way that He wants our lives to go, and He's shaping us like a potter shapes the clay. And He needs to use some of the weaknesses in order for us to be able to trust Him more deeply. It's a tough call. We don't always understand what's going on, but we need to give our weaknesses to God. Hand Him that difficult situation. Hand Him that health problem that you're facing. Hand it to Him and ask Him just to take care of everything, and then to trust Him for His grace and His strength. This is not an easy call. This is a tough issue for us. May God help us to cope with our thorns in the flesh. Bye for now. And may God bless you and strengthen you as you live by His grace and by His strength. Bye now.